Welcome. I'm not going to do the whole thing again, but I am going to tell you about ASD. Our mission is to build a thriving regional food and ag system that creates healthy communities, respects the planet, and cultivates profitable opportunities for Appalachians. And if you've been to any of these, you've heard this stuff before, so you could like tune out for 5 minutes. And I will not be offended. So who are we? We are a nonprofit working out of Southwestern Virginia and beyond since 95. So we're coming up on a big birthday. And our mission is to grow a stronger Appalachia through agriculture. We have 5 key areas of work, which are workforce development, agriculture education, food access, economic development, and resource conservation. Resource conservation is where agroforestry falls. So that's like a big bucket of work, and we're one sort of small corner of that team. And you can see we work in a really large area. We are based way southwestern Virginia. We're building an agricultural campus between Bristol and Abingdon. And our food hub works in the areas that you see on this map. So we ship food up and down the I-81 corridor and have a pretty big reach in that way. We really believe that agriculture has the power to transform Central Appalachia, helping to solve a lot of the food access, employment, and poverty issues in our region. Where we are, 1 in 8 families are food insecure. The number of farms and acres of farmland are declining. And nationally, we have some of the highest rates of average poverty, hunger, and unemployment. And here are some of the ways that we are leading the way. To date, we've produced and sold, or we have sold $40 million of produce and distributed it for regional farmers in our area. Over 150,000 pounds of food have been grown by new gardeners in our programming. More than 80 raised beds have been installed and managed at schools and clubs in the area. Over 5,000 acres of forest land have been preserved. We've helped start more than 300 new farm startups and supported them with trainings and resources. And more than 7 million pounds of local and regional food has been donated to area food pantries. We have a great big food box program that is one of the really big, exciting things that goes on at ASD. We're also building a big destination ag campus, and we are so pleased because this Giving Tuesday, we were able to raise $86,967. A 40,000 chunk of that was a matching donor. So really, really, really happy about that. And it's really going to help springboard and launch this operation that we've been working on in fundraising. A little bit about agroforestry specifically. You can find us. It looks a little different than this now, but you can find us on the programs tab drop down under agroforestry. We currently are working with 3 funding opportunities that are really useful to check out if you're trying to get some of these practices on the ground. We're working with the Expanding Agroforestry Project by TNC, Catalyzing Agroforestry Grant Program led by Virginia Tech, and the Assets Grant Program led by Virginia Tech and Working Trees. And so we've got a lot of opportunities. You can check those out on the funding page for the agroforestry program. Also, the agroforestry trainings for natural resources professionals. Stesha's your gal if you want to learn more about this. We have online courses and in-person trainings at regional demonstration sites. And if you're interested in learning more, you can check these out at learnagroforestry.com. And there are 2 free courses. So you can check out the free modules before you like invest in the package. And even if you were to invest in the whole package, it's like hundreds of hours of learning for, I think, $25 or something. It's incredibly cheap. And I've done them all personally, and I think they're really fabulous resources. And I would say that even if I didn't work here. The Appalachian Harvest Herb Hub is the last thing I'll talk about within ASD. This is a processing center where we do trainings, cost shares, processing, marketing, and aggregation services for people basically within a 3-hour radius of the herb hub. So folks that are growing medicinal herbs that want to come like sell to a tea company per se, they might not be growing enough to access the market of someone like traditional medicinals. But what ASD does is helps to aggregate orders so that people can reach these larger buyers at a higher dollar amount. So it's a really nice way to help these small businesses out. Thank you so much for tuning in this fall. We've talked about who's who in national agroforestry, centering racial justice in agroforestry, honey locust, yellowbud hickory, and nut collectives today. So just really appreciate you being here. Make sure to check out the YouTube playlist as it continues to populate. And here's where we're headed today. I am going to take a quick minute to introduce our guests. So I'm going to read their bios, which I know is going to be like a text-heavy, word-heavy screen for a minute. But while I'm doing that, I'm going to go ahead and launch a poll about who's in the audience today. And this is useful for us for our grant tracking metrics. It helps us like prove that we're reaching certain audiences and helps us get funding in the long term. So please participate. Stesh, will you mind launching that for me? Awesome. All right. While you are looking at that stuff, I am going to introduce our guests, starting with Justin Holt. Justin Holt has worked in agroecology, education, and organizing since 2010. He is a founder and worker owner of Nutty Buddy Collective and Asheville Nuttery, two closely linked organizations working to advance nut-centered agroforestry in Southern Appalachia. Justin is also owner of Wolf Tree Consulting, providing forestry and agroforestry services to landowners throughout the region. The Asheville Nuttery, who he's representing today, began cracking nuts for the Western North Carolina community in 2017. Every year since that time, the Nuttery has worked with nut gatherers throughout the region to purchase or trade finished products for the whole nuts they have delivered to the Nuttery. Over 200 growers and gatherers have brought in more than 30,000 pounds of black walnuts, hickories, acorns, hazelnuts, and pecans in the 7 years of the Nuttery's operation. Thanks so much for being here, Justin. Jeff Piestrak is drawing on a diverse food and farming background and training as a community and economic development specialist. Jeff serves as a facility and outreach coordinator for the New York Tree Crops Alliance, also known as NYTCA. He also owns and operates an agroforestry services business and nursery, FLX Agroforestry Solutions, which I assume you pronounce Flex for short. I have not actually asked that. NYTCA is a growers cooperative formed in 2019, focused on the production of chestnuts, hazelnuts, and their products. The 12 current member farms are located primarily in central New York State, where the co-op is developing a nut processing facility. Once fully operational, the NYTCA Nut Hub will be used to process, package, and distribute 6 planned products. Custom processing services will be offered to non-members as well. NYTCA also actively promotes the cultivation and consumption of tree crops by others. And thank you, Jeff. Looking forward to hearing more. And last but not least, Don English serves as the administrative director of the Keystone Tree Crops Cooperative, KTCC. KTCC is a new not-for-profit ag cooperative in Pennsylvania. Their goals are to establish and support a tree crops industry in the Mid-Atlantic region. KTCC functions as an aggregator for its members and provides value-added processing for tree nuts. Initial products include hickory nut oil and culinary chestnuts, and plans to expand into products from hazelnuts and black walnuts for progressing. All right, so I am going to end this poll and share results. Thanks so much, Don, for being here as well. All right, so y'all should all be able to see this now. It looks like we are at about 60% farmers, maybe a third natural resources professionals. We've got 4 researchers in the house, some interested individuals, a couple students, a few others. And if you're one of those others folks, please share in the chat what your work is. We'd love to hear. And then let's see, what are folks growing? Not growing anything, a few folks, that's cool too. Annuals, commodity crops, a lot of perennials growers, at least half, that's awesome. 17 tree crops growers, very exciting. And then some shrubs, medicinal herbs, awesome, awesome. And then at least 10 farmers growing for sale, so that's very cool. Oh, and yellow bud hickory is left from the last session. So 3 yellow bud folks, very cool. All right, I'm gonna close it out. I'm gonna stop sharing and I'm gonna stop talking. And I'm gonna go ahead and hand it over to Justin to introduce us to the Nuttery. Thanks, Justin.
Thank you, Emily.
Absolutely.
It's a pleasure to be here and share a little bit about what we have been up to. Um, Maybe I'll just go ahead and jump right into some slides and take take y'all through a whirlwind history of Asheville Nuttery. How's that looking?
That looks good. We see ya.
Cool. Well, so yeah, like Emily said in the introduction, Asheville Nuttery began in 2017, but our history goes back a few years before that. A group of us formed out of this group, the Buncombe County Fruit and Nut Club, and that was formed sometime in the late aughts, I guess. And I kind of encountered that group in 2010, 11, when I was fresh out of a permaculture design course and really hungry for some experience working with trees, which I was convinced are the solution to all of the world's problems. And had like basically everyone else who gets jazzed on permaculture, no land and no prospect of getting land um, at that point. And so I was thrilled to find this group that was kind of like, you know, taking back the commons in a way and saying like, hey, these public parks are what we've got for land, and let's plant fruit trees and nut trees and take care of them. And so this was a rally to defend some trees. This picture here that were slated for getting um, transplanted by some big machinery by the city because they had some development plans for that park. And so yeah, we that group formed, and a handful of us were really active in organizing, and were hungry for some more land. And we were kind of coming up against the limitations of working with and without permission in the city parks. And we were lucky enough to have a conversation with this woman here, Ileana Grams Moog, and she was putting some land into conservation. She invited us to plant the agricultural portions of the conserved land to a native nut orchard, native plant orchard. She's very enthusiastic about native plants, and in order to sign a lease with us, she was amenable to doing a very long-term 99-year lease, but it would have to be with an organization rather than with individuals. On the advice of her lawyer, that would be have more legs in the long run. And so that was the impetus for forming the Nutty Buddy Collective. And shortly thereafter, we got another lease. So we lease a couple small plots of land, 2 4-acre-ish orchards outside of town. And the five fellas there are the original Nutty Buddy Collective that formed in 2013. And after we had a couple of orchards planted, we started to realize that once these trees come into bearing, we would have to do something with the crops. And, there are no buyers for the native nut trees. They're the trees that grow really well here. Uh, Really, I mean, you can sell fresh chestnuts, but there aren't really good, strong markets for just about any of these crops that grow really well. And so we started to get our heads around what it was going to look like to be able to market the products of our orchards. And that was going to be figuring out how to do value adding. Um, and so we did some fundraisers and got some zero interest loans from some supporters to get the initial funds to buy some equipment. And worked with a lot of different community groups and volunteers. And we see on the bottom left there's a school group that was a big part of our early years in foraging nuts and gathering nuts. And so, right, so we in realizing that we'd have to start to figure out how to value add the crops, we also realized that there's actually an enormous opportunity already here. We don't need to wait to plant trees and then wait 20 years for them to start having a commercial crop. We can work with what's already here. And there's a number that I'd really like to share that really stuck with me. I read in a paper recently. The estimated annual crop in the US of black walnuts is 4 billion pounds. And the total amount that's processed commercially every year is around 20 million. There's one company basically that does that. That's the Hammond's Nut Company. So, that's the crop that's already here. We don't need to be planting more necessarily. I'm a big advocate of that too, and I think it's great. We could do both and. But anyway, the point is there's an enormous opportunity in the crops that are already existing. And the other thing that does is it kind of is a workaround to the land access question. It's like if you've got a vehicle to get to it to nut trees that are in parks and parking lots and churchyards and even just random strangers' front yards, if you go knock on the door, you've got basically a nut orchard already. Um, and I like to share this little slide. This is kind of I like to think of this as our open source orchard. Um, and so this is an open source map that you can add a pin to. And if you find a nut tree that's good to harvest from, you can gather nuts. And you can gather nuts from it. you put it on the map, and then it's like, part of the greater, this kind of expansive common orchard that everyone has access to. So, yeah, I mentioned black walnuts, but we're working with basically any nuts we can get our hands on. And black walnuts is the main nut we're working with because that's what is the most abundant in our area. And they're also very big, and people are accustomed to picking them up anyway to get them out of the yard so they don't break their ankles on them. And so, that's our main nut. It happens to be the hardest one to work with. Um, but yeah, we really love the black walnut despite its many challenges, and really do love when we can get a crop of bitter nut or yellow bud hickory, press that for oil. The high oil acorns like black oak and pin oak, willow oak, many others. We're working with those. And then there's flour that can come from all species of acorns. And the sweet hickories are, of course, amazing crops that can be made into milk. And if you're lucky enough to get one that has a large enough, ratio of kernel, you can crack it out for eating. Um, and part of what we've been doing is working with chefs in our area to kind of develop awareness and demand for the products and innovate new ways to work with the nuts. So we've got Owl Bakery here. They've been a big supporter. They buy nuts from us every year for their annual kind of a traditional Appalachian uh, uh, Christmas thing is called a Yule log, where they make she buys acorn flour and hickory nuts from us to make uh, be a big part of their Yule log every year. And this is kind of a group of chefs we assembled for a few meetups to kind of just come up with different recipes and share them. Um, and okay, where am I now? Oh yeah, there's some slides of some of the crops. So the high oil oaks are those are the ones you crack open. If you have a kind of an orange to yellow color in the kernel, you've probably got an oak with high oil content. There's the black walnuts, of course. Um, the bitter nut hickory, which Jesse insists we call yellow bud instead. He's trying to rebrand it. I I like trying to embrace the bitter. So anyway, bitter nut or yellow bud hickory. Um, we've been squeezing a lot of oil from that every year, and then yeah, we've got an orchard of chestnuts, and we're really excited about chestnuts. Though the chestnuts that we work with around here are, first of all, they're not very common. Same with the hazelnuts, and when you do find chestnuts, they tend to be pretty weevily. And I think chestnuts are probably gonna only be a commercial product when they're coming from orchards, really. Um, So we're not really working with the chestnuts so much at the Nuttery, though the Nutty Buddy Collective is. And yeah, and something we're doing with the Nuttery is like we're working on developing the processing infrastructure, the demand for kind of appropriate scale processing of these crops. And then, in the background, we've got our cultivar trees growing in our orchards and hopefully encouraging others to be growing these cultivar trees. And once we start to get the improved varieties coming in, we're going to be, we'll hit the ground running with much easier processing and higher yield of these thinner shell, larger kernel cultivars like the amazing Granger hickory nut here. Um, and yeah, this is just a picture of us top working some wild seedlings at the edges of our orchard, uh, which can really rapidly um, convert a wild space to a very productive orchard. I think some of these trees that we top worked, seedlings that were about around that size, within 2 years, we were getting a small crop of cultivar nuts from them.
So just
So,
just a 2-minute warning, Justin.
okay. Well, I think that's all my slides. I'm going to kind of zoom out a little
Perfect.
bit and talk a little bit about the bigger picture of the nuttery. And I don't know if it showed up anywhere in these slides, but we also have the kind of spin-off, a third, yeah, another. Um, nutty project called the Egg Cornucopia Project. And that is really it's like it's more of a vision and a concept than an organization. And the idea there is that, it can kind of contextualize what the Nuttery is doing as one example of a small community nut mill in a greater network of kind of a collaborative network of small community nut processing facilities or nut mills. Just kind of like how there used to be a grain mill in every community throughout the country, and not every farmer needed to have all the equipment they needed to mill to value add their grain crops. They would bring them to the grain and to the mill, and they would do the value adding there. So same concept for the nuts. And um, yeah, our hope is to really like I think I'm really excited to hear from Don and Jeff about what they're doing, but I kind of think we're like we're working kind of from the opposite side. It's like rather than working with growers, we're working with the crop that's already here, and then hopefully creating the incentive structure for growers to decide to dedicate their land and their resources to planting these trees. Um, and hopefully informing those decisions too with some understanding of what the market is like and what crops are viable and what the details are on the back end post-harvest side of things. And so the Eight Cornucopia Project and the Nuttery kind of together, the idea that we're working with is to kind of develop the Nuttery as a medium scale thing and really understand the kind of intermediate scale, kind of between, farm and backyard processing and the kind of industrial scale that the Hammond's nut processing facilities at. And there's a real gap there for equipment and knowledge and understanding of how to do it at that scale. So haven't been having to do a lot of innovation and yeah, just kind of figuring it out on the fly. And I'll just wrap up and say we just came off of doing a big push to do holiday boxes this year, and that's been really a big success for us marketing wise. We just sold about 100 nut cases, holiday nut cases this year, and that was most of our sales for this year. And last year we had a Tree SA CSA monthly box, and that was also a big success last year. So I think those are a couple models to consider too for sales rather than trying to do, traditional retail sales or farmers market sales every week out there, like the vegetable growers. It seems like people are really interested in nuts during the holiday season and the rest of the year. It's, you know, there's some big questions about, yeah, the state of the market and where things are going to go with that. So I'll stop there.
Thank you so much, Justin. It's really exciting to hear about what y'all are doing and kind of leading the way and this community-based effort. It's really, really cool. So thanks for sharing. We're going to hear more from Justin in a little while, but let's hand it over to Jeff.
Hello, all. Nice to join you. I'm from the northern fringes of the Appalachians. A lot of folks don't know that extends all the way up into New York State. Um, so I'm coming from there. Let's see. I have someone else is sharing. Let's see. How do I?
Here we go. I see.
There we go. So I'm going to talk about a nut growers co-op that formed in 2019, and it's a perfect segue for what Justin was just talking about, these regional nut processing mills. Our aspirations are pretty much that. We're not trying to be bigger than that. And as I'll explain during the presentation, we have some funding to do that, sort of have open books and share what we're doing quite freely. So this is sort of the very first part of that, sharing what we've been doing for the last year. So we formed in 2019. And we currently have about 12 medium small scale growers. Our co-op is focused on hazelnuts and chestnuts, but our growers farm about 150 acres total to tree crops. So that includes things like hickories and others. In fact, we've done a little bit of processing in our plant with those other nuts as well, but hazelnuts and chestnuts we're focused on marketing. Some of our growers are organic certified, and several have nurseries, which has been really a key asset for our work because there's been a lot of breeding and selection that have gone into what our growers are growing now to make it profitable. To become a member, it's an initial $100 fee, and then you're matched up with one of our existing growers as a mentor for a year. And then if you're approved by the board, there's another $350 fee, and then you become a full voting member. So as a co-op, every member has one vote. And right now, our growers are all centralized in central New York, but as we expand and grow, we're open to other growers, and we're certainly going to be offering services for non-members as well once our plan is fully operational. And so our nut hub, that's what we call it, is in central New York. So at a converted manufacturing facility for typewriters. So I'm always aging myself when I ask who remembers typewriters, but that was before computers. And they've carved up that facility into individual businesses. And this is the layout of our plant. It's about 2,600 square feet, so it's not that big. Um, this is still in flux. It's been quite a learning curve to figure out where we needed all the utilities. We've been getting those installed as we go and bumping up against all sorts of permits and regulations, but we're slowly working our way through that learning curve. And the equipment that we've acquired so far includes harvester huskers. So that's really important for the initial stage of getting those hazelnuts and chestnuts husked. We have a nut dryer, sizer sorter. The sizing is really, we've realized, become an important part of our processing because then we can optimize everything that happens after that. We have a Burrell cracker, and we separate the shells using an aspirator and a dust collector. And then we also have an oil press. So that was actually one of the very first things that the co-op acquired. So these are the 6 products that we're working on developing: snack bags, flour, oil, pancake mix. And we're also exploring a partnership with a local farmer. It's not a co-op, but it's an vertically integrated operation with organic flour that's produced to mix with our products. So things started initially with members just pooling their resources and doing some crowdfunding with the community to get started with purchasing our harvester husker and our oil press. And then in 2020, we got a grant recognizing that the genetics were really important to the long-term success of our project. So we partnered with Cooperative Extension, and folks went out into the field and took samples from shrubs and trees that the farmers thought were the most productive and promising. And that the results of that are published in this report. And there's also some information about our processing if you want to learn more about that. And then Edwards Mother Earth, who've been just fantastic with agroforestry. So I know that they're funding this webinar today, but they've been very generous in helping us get up to speed with our equipment. And then most recently, we got the Climate Smart Commodity Grant that's managed through the Nature Conservancy. There's probably several folks on this webinar today that are getting funded through that, and that's paying for my time here today, as well as Jonathan Bates, who I think is joining us. He's here as a viewer. And we have 5 years of funding to share what we're doing as we're doing it. So what became really clear early on, we're talking a bit about infrastructure today, is there's just a lot of moving pieces that all have to mesh together. So it became quite clear that we need some project management skills and tools. So we've been using Asana as a project management software. And it's really important because there's certain things that need to happen before others. So anyway, that's helping us muddle along. And then, of course, as a co-op, we're guided by, well, our own values, but also the 7 cooperative principles. I don't know if folks know about that, but since the Rochdale pioneers formed the initial co-op in England, it's been a very successful model for some of us. So open membership, 1 member, 1 vote. And I'll go through some of these principles as they relate to opportunities and challenges of our co-op. So the democratically controlled, it sounds really nice, but people have to actually participate. So one of the challenges for us is we're all farmers and we're very busy. And so trying to get our structure to work out where we can make decisions quickly and timely As continues to be a challenge, but we're working through it, trying to find the tools that will help us do that. And it's especially challenging because we're trying to build new value chains. Justin sort of touched on some of that, that you're sort of building from the ground up for a lot of this infrastructure. And so some of the decision-making systems that have been mentioned to us that we might explore include sociocracy. It's based on consent rather than consensus. So somebody doesn't have a problem, but others want to run with it. That's great. So we'll be probably exploring things like this to help us make decisions more efficiently going forward. And then education and training, that's really been important with our members even before and alongside the duties of the co-op. And here, there's one of our members during a field day, she was showing the methods that she used for propagating new hazelnuts using layering. And that's a method that is one of the few that's actually successful with hazelnuts. And then Brian Caldwell is one of our organic growers. We hosted a field day there. He grows chestnuts and hazelnuts, amongst other things. And then Jeff Zarnowski, who has Z's Nutty Ridge, he published a guide on how to layer chestnuts. So we're freely sharing what we're learning as we go in hopes that others can do similar efforts in their region. And of course, scaling is this thing that always comes up when we talk about agroforestry. How do we sort of make this happen more quickly? And one of the ways that we're looking at is not increasing our productivity necessarily, but increasing our connectivity with others who might have complementary interests. And one of the models that I think folks should consider as I've been working through the work with our co-op is we're trying to do an awful lot. We're trying to build a lot of systems all at once, and it's really hard for one organization to do. And so there are other models like multi-stakeholder co-ops that have been developed. The fifth season co-op in Wisconsin is one example of that. And so I think at some point we might want to explore something like that, or others might want to explore something like that, where you have owners that aren't just growers or aren't just processors, but they have shared interest across the whole value chain. And of course, concern for community, that's the last principle of the cooperative principles, is probably why a lot of our growers actually got into this in the first place. They saw that the benefits that trees offered humanity and nature, and um, they wanted to share what they were doing with others. So our co-op is very active in practicing those values. And if folks want to learn more about what we're up to, our website has a lot of information. We use that as our primary blogging platform, nytca.org. Or you can reach out to us directly at outreach@nytka.org.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. I'm looking forward to hearing more in a few minutes, but it's great to hear and see what y'all are working on because it's like in in our East Coast agroforestry scene, it's like I feel like I know about what everyone's up to, but it's always good to hear the details because you never really know. And with that, I'll hand it over to Don.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm with the Keystone Tree Crops Cooperative is, I mean, we are really the new kids on the block. We have been in existence for about 9 months now. We organized in March of 2024. But we've processed several gallons of yellow bud hickory oil that we sold on our website and sold out in just a couple of days. There is demand for yellow bud hickory oil, and it was astonishing to us. We've sold some culinary chestnuts. One of our members sold us some chestnuts that we resold in preparation for the holidays, and those equally went very, very quickly. Our area, we're based, loosely based in south central and southeastern Pennsylvania. We have several members in York County, um, Lancaster County, Adams County, a couple are in the Center County area, in the geographic center of the state, and several in the Reading area. So kind of in the southeastern portion. I guess a little southeast of the Appalachian Range, but still close enough. And that the the spatial disparity of our people is one of our challenges. Um, we have about eight, yeah, I think eight members right now, four of whom are actually growing crops, tree crops, three who are growing trees to sell, and one who really is just interested in the product and wants to get involved and see this thing moving forward. So we don't have a lot of acreage within the co-op right now, but we're looking to expand that. So we're kind of a blend of foragers and growers and enthusiasts who are looking to bring more people into the fold. Part of our goal for 2025 is to grow to 20 to 25 members. And Jeff, I would love to just show Jeff's presentation again because we're following many of the same goals. We are modeled on sociocratic principles and democratic decision making, and we're trying to be a multi-stakeholder co-op. We started with just producer members, meaning people who sell us nuts, but we are going to expand within the next few months to having worker members, those people who might work to process nuts or maintain our equipment or drive stuff around, whatever it might be, doing work that's of value to the co-op. Um, so that's another challenge for us as we get this going. And since most of well, all of our growers, none of them are growing as, I guess two of them are growing as a primary income. So for most of us, this is a side hustle. And that means we're getting things done nights and weekends. And our meetings are nights and weekends, and we're fitting it in. And that's yet another challenge is being temporally challenged. And all of our people are relatively young. So they're starting careers, they're starting families. They don't have any money. Some of them have land, some of them don't. So we're putting all this interest together from people who love what they're doing and value things. But the challenges are finding time, finding money. Um, so we would like to move beyond 20 to 25 members. There's certainly people in the western part of Pennsylvania. We know several with black walnut trees or black walnut orchards, and figuring out how to get them involved. That's a it's a challenge with black walnuts that you don't really want to drive them 200 miles to sell them because then you don't make any money out of it. So we're looking at establishing a couple of small processing hubs in sub-regional areas of Pennsylvania. Since our articles of incorporation say Pennsylvania and adjacent states, we're working some with some folks in New Jersey who are growing hazelnuts. We're working some with a couple of farmers just a little south of Pennsylvania in Maryland, because Maryland doesn't have anything. We're the closest thing to them. So crossing state lines a little bit is within our scope of interest, and it makes a lot of sense. If we have people along the northern Pennsylvania border, Jeff's folks may be a lot simpler to get to than driving to Harrisburg or Lancaster or someplace southern Pennsylvania. So that kind of cooperation between co-ops is also part of our strategic plan. Through the Mother Earth Foundation, we got a grant to purchase a Kazakhstan harvester, and it's living in a barn right now. It arrived 3 weeks ago, so kind of a little after any sort of season. So we have some gathered hickory nut, yellow bud hickory nuts that we want to run through it to dehusk them. That's the first thing we want to do with it to see how well or poorly that works and just figure out how to run it. And then the nuts that we have should get us another 6 gallons, 5 to 6 gallons of yellow bud oil, which will be wonderful. And will provide a little bit of income for us to get some stuff done. Um, so like Jeff's group, we are trying to be democratically run. So we're trying to have as flat an organization as possible. We have 7 members on our board of directors who are active and a couple of empty slots. Um, we have committees to get all the different work done, but right now those committees are just board of directors folks with one leader and 1 or 2 other people helping them and getting more members. And we're just starting a membership drive now. Um, is yet another challenge for us is to get more bodies in there to get work done as we need to get stuff done. So our main challenges, geez, starting from nothing, um, fitting it in around time, and just getting agreement. I think that if you're looking to start a nut cooperative, the sociocracy model is great, but it doesn't work quickly. It takes a lot of time to make decisions and get through things. And I see Jeff nodding his head, saying, "Yep, that you got to build that in. If you want to make a quick decision, that's probably not the way to do it." We were helped tremendously in getting organized and getting started by the Keystone Development Center. It's a group in Pennsylvania, based in Pennsylvania, that focuses on developing cooperative organizations. And they're working with some folks in New Jersey right now. I know they worked with a flower farm group in central Maryland. So they do cross state lines. They're not focused just on Pennsylvania. But if you're thinking about working with a co-op, contact KDC. They're really wonderful. Um, they have a co-op academy that a number of us went through that introduced us to the sociocracy model and how to set things up and get us really set up nicely with our articles of incorporation, get our board of directors, get our bylaws set up, all that administrative background stuff that if you're not doing that on a regular basis can take an awful lot of time and frustration. So I highly recommend KDC as an organization. And I hope somebody from the group is listening because that's a great shout out. Um, we have on our website, there is a link to an application, and we have a $200 application fee to join. And then after a year, it's a $60 a year membership fee. Since we have producer members, we want our producers to sell us something or contribute in some way at least 2 out of every 3 years, recognizing that there may not be some years where you can get anything. Maybe the trees that you can access are not available or just didn't produce. We're in the process of writing several guidebooks for how to harvest sustainably and ethically, particularly on somebody else's land, because we want to maintain both good relations with people and transparency in how we're doing our operations. And those guidebooks are coming out of our membership committee, but the goal is within 2025 to have them written and published and shared. Um, and that's really helpful. We're in 2025, we have an award from the Pennsylvania Association for Sustainable Agriculture to do various marketing research and marketing analysis for a yellow bud hickory oil, for chestnut products, for hazelnut products, and for black walnut products. Those are things that we want to get more information about to be able to market them well regionally, at least regionally, including nutritional analyses for the products that we're going to be selling, for understanding what the current price points are and processing costs might be. Let's see. So we're behind both these other 2 folks in this amount of equipment we've got. We just have the harvester and an oil press. And I'm sorry, we have on loan from Penn State Extension, we have a mobile chestnut dunker that you can take to a chestnut orchard and dunk think it's 50 gallons of nuts at a time to do weevil kill, um, and then take it someplace else. But that's something that we have the construction specs for that, and we're willing to share that with people. If somebody wants to make their own mobile chestnut dunker, it's self-contained, powered by I think a car battery and a propane tank to heat the water and circulate the water. So that's really good. Part of our challenge for operation is we don't have a hub right now. So we're renting space to press our oil in a licensed kitchen. And that's an additional cost. Finding a place to we could do our own stuff and store our own equipment is high on our list, but we haven't found one yet. And it may be we have several small ones. We're in discussions with a couple of folks who have said, boy, well, you can use my place. But Pennsylvania Department of Ag says if you're going to have a licensed food facility, here are the requirements. And we got to make sure that we have all those requirements. So that's, again, something we'll be doing in the coming year. Uh, what else
Just a
do I
2 minute
need to
warning,
say?
Don.
I'm sorry?
2 minute warning.
2 minute warning. Okay. Um, I think I'm good.
Okay,
That's us in a nutshell.
perfect.
We benefit from having both the Asheville Nuttery and NYTCA to follow along and say, oh yeah, these guys learned some stuff. I think what we might have as a benefit is that we're more focused on yellow bud hickory oil right now as a primary product and figuring out how to get that done. But I think between the three of us, there's knowledge for folks who want to join in building this market. I'm done.
Excellent. Thank you so much for sharing. And y'all in the audience may notice that we sort of started with the most long-standing cooperative and moved through. So it's really fun to see the different scales and different timelines and kind of imagine, like it's fun to listen to you talk about Keystone and sort of like imagine what that might look like as y'all move through your different iterations. Um, so we're going to move into the Q&A. And first off, we're going to start kind of broad, and whoever wants to take this first, go ahead. But, what do you most want people to know about this? We're going to get into more specific questions, but what do you most want people to know about this whole business of, cooperative farming and value adding, and I think the easiest way to frame this is probably maybe like challenges and opportunities, right? Like what's kind of the low hanging fruit that maybe people miss? As you were presenting, I was thinking about, I toured NYTCA in July, whenever NNGA was. And when I was there, and it was so cool seeing all the equipment laid out like in the diagram and seeing some of it do its thing. And it's like there's on the one hand, there's this romantic idea of like tending your trees. And on the other hand, there's like like the reality of like processing equipment and what that's like. And they're very different. So I don't know. That was just like an interesting sort of like reality check for me. I'm wondering what else in those ways this kind of question brings up. Challenges and opportunities.
Well, since you mentioned NITCA, I'll just jump in there and say, yeah, I think that's an issue in all sorts of sectors. Like I mentioned, a friend of mine is an organic grain farmer, and has developed the value chain for that. So oftentimes he'll get people that want to work on the farm, and then they realize they're more grease monkeys than farmers. They're operating heavy equipment all day on these grain farms. So there's some realization that you need interest and capacity to set up and maintain machinery, and you might be in a warehouse. You're not outside. So that's sort of why I was bringing in this idea of multi-stakeholder, because some of the people that might be growing these crops don't necessarily want to be doing that part or don't have the time. So yeah, I think if I had a suggestion, I'd say, start smaller and iterate and think about, what that value chain looks like, what the potential avenues are, who your community is, instead of just trying to figure out how to immediately scale the product that 5 or 10 or 20 growers have. Think about maybe who are those few growers that can participate in an experiment and developing the value chain, and don't necessarily try to get a big grant and buy all your equipment at once. That's been nice in some ways for us, but it's also been like, oh, once we got into it, we realized that this other piece of equipment might be more important or more of a priority, or we overscaled this thing and we underscaled that thing. So get it, I would say start it out as a learning curve. Don't assume you know everything that you need to know already when you start.
As we go through the process of acquiring equipment, there are very real questions about where's it going to live, who's going to operate it, who's going to maintain it. If it's going to be something that we rent out, what does that liability and cost point look like? How do we manage all those things? So I think Jeff's exactly right that there's a lot of different and often not only different but disparate kinds of pressures in this kind of business because of what it is. Many in the Mid-Atlantic, at least, most growers are fairly small. Farm sizes, even for conventional ag, are seldom above 250 acres, and orchards even less. Nut orchards even less. So that spatial dis, disjuncture is really a key thing to think about. Where are your people coming from? Where are they going to go?
Yeah, right. I mean, I I laughed when you described that kind of that you made the da sound because that's what my life is. It's like yeah, I'm like wearing a dust mask and still like somehow the nut dust gets behind the dust mask and yeah, it's in my ears and stuff. And it's like we have a shaker table that's like a metal table with different sizes of screens on it to separate. Mostly it's the black walnuts that go through there and I mean, it's just a metal table that's designed to vibrate, and it's very loud. And so are the multiple nutcrackers we're using, and the optical sorter, which I'd love to take a moment to recommend at the right time. And yeah, right. It's just very different from how I pictured my day to day being when I started to get into nuts. And it's fun. It's like, it's a lot of problem solving and troubleshooting and it's a big old puzzle. And kind of on paper, it does integrate fairly well with farming. I mean, the nuts are at the end of the farming season is when they come in. It's maybe the last thing you do is harvest the nuts, get them put up. They store really well. You can have work through the winter processing them. And if you're efficient and have enough, capacity to do it, you can get them all processed into product that then is, stored in a refrigerator and shelf stable, and you can sell it throughout the year. And you can get all that done theoretically before the next growing season. So yeah, I mean, it's never quite worked like that for us. But I think on paper, it's something reasonable to aspire to. Um, and yeah, could be a way for farmers to kind of get through the slim season of no revenue during the winter. Uh, so yeah, was there something else related to that question? I don't know. There's so many things I could keep saying.
No, I think that's great, and we'll keep moving, and things are going to come out as they come out. So that's perfect. So the next question we have is really about business structure, and I know in different phases this is going to change. So maybe we could think about it in terms of like getting it off the ground, and then so like getting the work funded, and then getting the work sustained. Like what is that model for each of you? And I think you're all nonprofits. I think. Um, Justin's saying no. So I know Don is. But anyway, I'll let y'all answer that because I promise I listen. But think of me as the voices of the people, the voice of the people. We don't take in all the information all the time. So
Cool.
how are you getting off the ground, and how are you staying funded and staying viable?
Okay. Well, since I'm unmuted,
Yeah.
I'll take it first. We started with a group of five of us, and we started with a fundraiser, and we formed an LLC after considering going the nonprofit route and considering the kind of whatever the cooperative tax designation is for North Carolina. And it just didn't seem like we quite fit the requirements, and we wanted to move faster than the nonprofit thing was going to go for us. And also, yeah, there was a desire to kind of be more kind of just agile and adaptive. And we knew that we could do what we were doing without much funding to start when we got the collective going and planted the trees. And we also knew that we there was a lot that we didn't know, and we'd be learning a lot as we went. And so it was just, an LLC was just the simplest way to just get rolling and start learning things. And and yeah, I mean, we did a fundraiser, and truth be told, like we had some good social capital to spend in our community, where one of my partners, Bill, had been doing workshops, and he's kind of a big presence in the community and the kind of like alternative agricultural community here for a long time. And we'd been working, like I said, in the public parks, and so we kind of had a community that was already supporting what we were doing, and they were very excited to see us kind of take this next step. And so that was kind of the initial burst of funding, where we just did a fundraiser and a Kickstarter and an event. And like I said, got that it's a couple of 0 inches loans totaling $10,000 so we could buy the oil press. Actually, they were not 0 inches loans. We paid interest in oil. So we paid them back in hickory oil and black walnut oil and acorn
I
oil.
love that.
Yeah, that's the kind of economy we want to be moving toward, right? Um,
Absolutely.
and yeah, and then as far as like since then, the Nuttery, we've received a little bit of grant funding by working with a fiscal sponsor, a friend who's got another nonprofit that is, kind of doing similar work in kind of community resiliency. And and then sales, we've just like been generating revenue to kind of just keep things going, although we haven't been paying ourselves anything. So and we started with five of us. A couple of people left the organization, so there's just three of us now. And yeah, we're really at a kind of a big moment in the like kind of life cycle of our projects. We're wondering what is the next step, because we can't keep kind of volunteering for our future selves. And yeah, we've got kids, and just like moving into different phases of our lives. And so yeah, the funding question is a big one, and where we're at with the nunnery is that we think that we've learned enough that we have all of the material we need to put together a business plan that can demonstrate kind of real viability on paper, and then we can go, get probably some low interest loans from impact investors is what we're looking at. And we're waiting on hearing back from the Resilient Food Systems Infrastructure Grant that would be about $100,000 worth of equipment that'll come in to support us. So that's kind of what we're looking at for the funding picture. And I was going to mention something about our cooperative, because we're an LLC. We're not technically a cooperative. Um, though, a lot of whether organization is a cooperative just kind of comes down to your internal agreements, and that's, how we're sharing the profit is a big piece of what a nonprofit, I mean, a co-op is about. And for us, there hasn't been any profit, so it's kind of a moot point. Um, but eventually there will be, and it's our plan to kind of, slowly, kind of at tree pace, roll it all out as a cooperative organization. But right now, it's really just proof of concept. Research and development is the phase we've been in, and we're kind of transitioning out of that, hopefully over the course of the next year, into a kind of growth phase of a viable business. So I'll stop there.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Justin. And also just really appreciate your candor to just say like, yeah, we're not paying ourselves right now. That's where we're at. And I think that's a really hard thing for a lot of people to say. And I think that very, very, very many new or young, and even though your organization isn't that new or young, these beginning years are really, really tough. And I think it's not talked about enough in the world of farming of all types that people typically aren't paying themselves for a significant period of time. And yeah, I think it's important to put it out there. So thank you.
Yeah.
Who wants to go next? Don, I see you're not
I
muted.
think for the Keystone tree crops, our business structure is one that will keep the organization poor. We want to pay our growers a reasonable wage for their nuts. We want to pay the workers a reasonable wage for doing the processing. And then once we look at the price point, that doesn't leave a lot of margin for overhead or going back into the co-op. And that's going to be something we will have to struggle with. And making it up in volume is not possible for us right now. We'd like to think that having a bigger processing facility would cut our per unit costs and give us um, better margins, but we're not there yet. We're somewhere larger than somebody's kitchen, but a lot smaller than where either NYTCA or the Nuttery are. Um, renting 100 square feet of a commercial kitchen for running a nut processor is small. So that's one challenge for a co-op is you're not bringing lots of money back into your organization, even once you're successful. And we'll be dealing with that over the next few years. Right now, all our board of directors are volunteers. Um, the people who've been doing the nut processing have kind of said, "Well, here's how many hours I'm doing this. Eventually, you're going to pay me, right?" And eventually, we're going to pay them. But we haven't been doing that yet. We've been working on getting other stuff done. But again, we're in our first year, and things are now that we have product to sell, we'll start to have a little bit more money to figure out what to do with it.
Jeff, do you want to weigh in here?
Yeah. Yeah, I think I'll focus on a couple of things that sort of provide a more 360-degree view of this point. And one thing I would say is that there's something to be said for working with people who have skin in the game, whose livelihoods depend on growing and marketing nuts, who aren't retired or have other businesses, or this is the fourth or fifth business. So I find myself thinking a lot about that, about starting a business is a lot of work. You really have to put a lot into it to make it successful. And so there has to be some self-interest. It's sort of ironic that we're a co-op, but co-ops harness self-interest and they see that self-interest is group interest. So getting people to really put the sweat equity into the organization is important. And so there's a danger if you're dependent on nonprofit or grants that it really isn't going to be sustainable in the long run. You're always going to be dependent on those grants. So I'd say think a lot about that, about having a nice mix of people who can contribute different things to the organization. It might be time, it might be product, whatever it is. And in terms of getting a decent price for it, I don't think there's any way that we can compete with the commodity markets. I don't know that the kind of scale that the three of us are dealing with is ever going to compete. Hazelnuts, 95 or more percent of them come from Turkey, and they're very cheap. So we have to focus to some extent on product differentiation. What is it that makes our hazelnuts worth $15 a pound versus, $3 or $4 a pound? Um, and to that extent, it might just be regional markets. For us here in New York, people see that they're being grown regionally or locally, sustainably. That's something that we might want to really focus on with our product differentiation. So it's just going to be interesting to see how all these little experiments succeed and what are the ways that they can to get a decent return on their product. And I know the American Hazelnut Company has been working with hazelnut growers in the upper Midwest. To some extent, they're incredibly successful in terms of developing an ecosystem of support with universities and a cooperative extension. It's a model that we're looking to try to repeat here in New York. Cooperative extension is a good ally to have. Um, but they're actually, it's a challenge to be able to sell their products at an affordable amount and still get the return that they need for their farmers. So, it's a complex problem that each region is probably going to have a different mix of solutions to.
Awesome. Thanks, y'all. This is such fun, like maybe I don't know if fun's the word, fun for me. It's it's engaging stuff. It's yeah, stuff that I really value conversation around. Um, I think we'll do one more of what we prepared ahead of time, and then I want to move into the Q&A to make sure that we have time. Because there's a lot of overlap anyhow. What do y'all recommend as the like necessary go-to starter equipment? I know I'm hearing like, don't assume a scale and do too much too early, but what's the like low bar if someone's interested in getting into this kind of work? And Justin, this can be an opportunity for you to talk about your optical sorter too, if you'd like.
Okay, yeah, I answered that a little bit in the Q&A in the chat, but yeah, just briefly, we last year had the opportunity to use an optical sorter that a friend purchased, and it was a game changer. We had been doing some very laborious methods with sorting black walnuts, and that was a huge bottleneck, the sorting. And I don't think that you'll have a viable operation, commercial operation around most of these nuts, but certainly not black walnuts without a color sorter. And so the one we used is from a company called Realtek in China, and it's the Q32. I think it's the smallest model they have. And it's designed for removing off-color grains of rice and hull from rice. And so, typically it's like ejecting a little bit of the material that's going through, whereas we're putting we're putting material through that's, 50% or more shell. So we're using it pretty hard. There's a lot of questions about yeah, just like what the durability is and maintenance cycle on that. But it was a big breakthrough for us to discover that there was something that we could afford. It was less than $15,000 to get it here, whereas the cheapest one we could find before we came upon this one was closer to $50,000. Um, so it's a whole different ballpark. And yeah, I mean, other equipment is really going to depend on the nuts you're working with. It's crazy how specific it turns out to be, and how limited the supply is of these of this equipment. Like, there's very few manufacturers in the domestically for the crackers and sorters and winnowers and aspirators. And so, yeah, I mean, a lot of that is coming out of Asia, mostly China and Europe, where they have kind of, much more robust kind of medium scale, but still like, industrial um, suppliers. And so, yeah, it's hard for me to say much more than that without getting into specifics of specific nuts. The color sorter certainly is important, and I will say that the one cracker that we use a lot. So the black walnut, of course, and the hard-shelled hickories are going to need a pretty big cracker. We use the Patriot 600, um, which is the one commercially available black walnut cracker. Um, and then there's a cracker that does not have a name on it. Some friends actually got it in a grant for processing hazelnuts, and what it is. It's a Dave built nutcracker, which I'm sure a lot of y'all have seen and used, and it's got a motor attached to the arm, so it's powered by a motor and just kind of moves it back and forth. And then there is a like a squirrel cage blower that sits underneath it. So the day built sits on a stand. The blower sits underneath it, and then there's some duct work. So the nuts fall out of the Dave built into the ducting, and then that's like the winnowing chamber. And so we use that with great success for bitternut hickory, slash yellowbud, and all the acorn species, hazelnuts, pecans, basically everything that's thin enough to be cracked by a Dave built. Um, and then we winnow off, it varies from species to species, but usually 90% or more of the shell gets removed that way. Um, and then it really improves the rest of the processing. So I don't know where to get that. There are some things that are similar, and if you look in the pecan industry, but nothing quite like that. I haven't been able to find it, but it certainly could be built by someone who's got some basic, um, you know, machine skills. So yeah, those two I think would be really key. Would get you a long way to processing a whole lot of stuff.
I'll piggyback on there, and saying, yeah, I think that the separating the shells from the kernels is really what we're facing as the trickiest challenge. And Justin, we really would love to hear more about your experience with your optical sorter. It's something that we saw in action with the Upper Midwest Hazelnut Development Initiative. I'm going to put a link here that describes their equipment that they're using, but it doesn't include the optical sorter, so it might be a fairly recent addition. And I put a link to earlier to a universal cracker, which is it's pretty pricey for what it is, a tabletop cracker, $5,000. But it is workable for a smaller scale. I think your point is a good one that there's very little on the small scale infrastructure. We found that the European companies are a little more suited to family farms, that a lot of the family nut farms that have existed for hundreds of years in Europe. So Burrell is a larger industrial scale cracker we have, but they also make some smaller stuff. And so, it's challenging. We're also working with Pendragon Manufacturing out of Wisconsin to kind of custom build some of our equipment, including what's called an aspirator that uses a vacuum that pulls the shells up and the kernels theoretically drop down. That hasn't been entirely successful. So now we have a drum sorter coming in, and you can make those yourself out of PVC pipe to some extent for at least sizing the nuts, but that's not really a solution for separating the shells. So the latest innovation with that has been Jason Fishbach with the Upper Midwest Hazelnut Development Initiative has experimented with hardware cloth, stainless steel hardware cloth that's worked really well. So people are handy in manufacturing equipment. I mean, I think that's probably a skill set you really want to get in early to custom make some of the stuff just to get started. And I would say that oil pressing really is a great entry product. I think that's something we're going to focus on more initially because there's less burden to get all of those shells out. If you're not going to reuse the meal, which is a delicious thing unto itself, I think that might be something that we market. My wife made some cookies with hazelnut meal that we had from our plant, and they were the tastiest cookies I've ever had. So I can envision selling that as, refrigerated tubes of meal. But yeah, if you don't get all the shells out, you can still press some really great oil out of it. So that's probably a really early product.
I guess I would echo what these guys have said. I mean, for us, since our first product was hickory nut oil, we had to get the nut press, and we funded that through a crowdfunding approach. Um, as we look to expand our set of products, we're looking at other equipment that would allow us to branch out. And I think that the biggest set of investments would be if we're going to get into black walnuts, and they're a ubiquitous tree in the mid-Atlantic, we need the big nutcracker. And then I don't know if Justin's group's press oil out of crushed black walnuts, but that would be something that we're not sure the Kerncraft 20 that we've got would do that. And that's a question of whether we need a bigger oil press if we're going to do oil out of black walnuts. Um, we're going to be experimenting with hazelnut oil this spring, and that's something we haven't done yet. So we'll be talking to Jeff and say, okay, how do you use your Kerncraft to press hazelnut oil? What are the protocols that we need to be sure we do or don't do, as the case may be? Um, so I part of it, I mean, again, the equipment you need depends upon what nuts you've got and what you want to do with them. If you want to roast hazelnuts or just shell hazelnuts, they take you in slightly different places. And Justin's comment, I think, was right that most of the equipment is focused on the requirements for one nut, the size, the thickness of the shell, the stuff. You kind of it's hard to get. We got drums for our Hazelstone for both hazelnuts and hickory nuts. And ideally, we're gonna check out the drum for chestnuts as well, and see if we can do that. But that's if you get a harvester like that, you also need to power it because ours doesn't have an internal motor. So now you need a tractor, and if you're going to take it places, now you need a trailer to get it from one place to the other. So think about the logistics as you come up with your list of equipment as to just, I mean, from tree to sales, there's probably 3 or 4 pieces of things you're going to need. If you're going to make oil, you need a cooler to let it settle. If you're going to have to bottle it somehow, you're going to need the bottles and the labels and a label maker. And it's not, it, it sounds really romantic and wonderful, but then you get into it and yeah, you're at the multiple pieces of equipment. But think about what and again, both my compatriots here have said start small. And that was our approach. We want to start with hickory nut oil and we'll branch out to hazelnut oil because we think we can use the same machinery. And then we'll add other things as we figure out the marketing and the distribution and the processing. And there'll be learning curves to figure out what the processing costs are. But yeah, start small and start focused.
Great answers, y'all. And we're, man, just breezing through our time. So I think this last question that we really have time for, and I'll just ask for like a fortune cookie version of your answers because I want to do this and maybe try to hit one more if I can. But a real nut and bolt question. What are y'all doing with your waste products, your husks, your shells, your press cake? Don, go ahead.
We have several gallons of hickory nut press cake, and last couple of years I've experimented with using that in my own home grill as a smoking alternative. And we once we gather stuff up and let it dry, we want to talk to a couple of chefs, or there's a jerky maker in our area who might be willing to buy it as a smoking product. But this again, this is yellow bud hickory, so when you char it, you still get that hickory smoke flavor out of it.
Yeah, I can't fit it on a fortune cookie paper, but there's so many so many co-products, potential co-products, yeah, that are byproducts. So black walnut, of course, the hull is excellent for dyeing, and we've worked with a company here that bought 100 pounds or so of dry hull from us last year to dye their t-shirts with. They make t-shirts out of entirely North Carolina grown products. And they're actually, I think they just published a white paper. That's a link I should have provided. It's called TS Designs is the name of the company, and they published a white paper after working with some students from the University of Vermont. That's all focused all on regional black walnut economy. and they looked pretty deeply at the markets for different co-products. So the shell, of course, is really highly valuable and as an abrasive, and we're also experimenting with different kind of value-added products there. The one we're probably most hot on right now is biochar. Turns out the shell, the very hard black walnut shell makes a super high quality, very durable charcoal that is highly desirable in um, aquaculture. I always forget, confuse ponics and culture. But yeah, and lots of potential from the other co-products. But yeah, it's a whole lot of R&D, and the R&D can be endless. So we're slowly chipping away at it.
Yeah, I don't know that we quite figured out what those channels are. I would say that I think that food safety regulations would limit what we can do um, depending on the processing. So, like our shells and debris, we get some split kernels that will go out through our filter into our canister. And even for like pet food or animal food, I think there's some regulations that we would have to abide by. So the farmers themselves might be using this material, might be composting it, feeding it to their chickens. But it's an interesting question. And the folks from the Edwards Mother Earth visited our plant this summer, and they're from Seattle area, and they mentioned that they use hazelnut shells in the Pacific Northwest for slug control. We hadn't even thought of that. So maybe that's a product line that we could develop. But biochar sounds really interesting. So it'll be interesting to compare notes with y'all as we move forward what those channels are.
Well, I think rather than trying to ask another question and just running way over, it's always a challenge with multiple panelists because everything takes longer, but we get so much more information this way that I find it really valuable. And I see that y'all have been doing some good work with the Q&A and the chat. So thanks everybody for chiming in. What I'll try to do is see if I can compile those into a doc to share when I send things out too, so it's a little more easily digestible because there's been this whole other Q&A happening in the background. So thank you so much, everybody, for being here. Thanks for spending your Monday lunch hour with us. We appreciate it. And we'll see y'all in the spring with some more lovely Ask an Agroforester content. If you have anything you'd like to hear about, please reach out. Let us know. A lot of what we are offering here is shaped by the feedback we're getting and questions that people have. So love to hear from you. And yeah, if Justin can get that link, we'll make sure that it's available in the follow-up material. Anything y'all want to say in closing? Just like where can people find you if they want to know more? Is just through your straight up website's the best move? Jeff, I'll send that to you first.
Yep, NYTCA.org, NYTCA.org. And thanks for having us here today. It was a pleasure.
Yeah, my pleasure. Justin, what about y'all?
Yeah, AshevilleNuttery.com at Gmail, AshevilleNuttery@gmail.com. I answer those emails, so that's a direct line to me. And I will indeed send you that link to that white paper.
Great. And Don.
Keystone Tree Crops Cooperative. There's only one of us on the web, and I think Keystone Tree Crops Co-op dot at Gmail is one, or if people want to ask me a question directly, it's director@ktcc.coop.
That's the one I'm going to put in the chat because it's shorter. All right. Thanks, everybody, so much. Have a wonderful rest of your week and a great holiday season. And we'll see you sometime in the new year. Take care.
Thanks, Emily.
Thanks, Emily.